everyone, and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hack Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head, and in this episode, I'm talking to Chris Collier. He's the Director of Assistive Technology at Open Genius, the creator of Aola. He's worked in disability support for 15 years, carrying out needs assessment and learning assessments. He has managed assistive technology and human support services. Aola is a mind mapping solution that uses AI to enhance its capabilities. As always, I'll put links to things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks very much, Matt. Great to be with you.
Yes, it's good to see you again. Chris was on a stage I was hosting at the Dyslexia show talking about disabled students allowance and how people can get into that. So it's good to catch up again. But where I kind of wanted to start this podcast off with really is that you told me in the preamble, to be honest, about you not being dyslexic yourself. But one of the things I'd be interested to see is when did neurodiversity and I guess particularly dyslexic, seeing the show, come onto your radar?
So a great question to start with, Matt. And a little bit of my story. I grew up in Southern Africa and studied at university in South Africa. And I did English language and linguistics and English literature, and then went on to do a PGC there. And it was there when I was doing a research project that I started looking at that in the mainstream school classroom. So it came on the radar then, and not to give my age away, but that was a good 20 years ago now. And so the thinking has probably evolved hugely since those early kind of conversations about it, and probably the essays I wrote at the time would not make much sense to people now. Then I kind of came back to the UK in 2007, and I was looking around at what to do, and probably didn't want to be a secondary English teacher. So I got into disability support, then supporting students one-to-one through the Disabled Students Allowance funding. So that was my kind of route into assistive technology and dyslexia support in the UK.
Okay, so that's interesting. Growing up in Southern Africa, how is, I know it's 20 years ago, so it's out of date, but how was dyslexia seen at the time? Like, what do you think the thinking was at that point in time and when you were first exposed to it?
I'd say the awareness was very low, and probably even lower than it was in the UK 20 years ago. And it would be interesting to see how that has moved on now. So there was an awareness of it, but certainly there was not widespread training for teachers about dyslexia and how a student may be affected by that in the classroom. There was not a lot of diagnosis and support at that time, and that probably has moved on as it has here.
Yes, definitely. And what sort of drew you to it in your kind of studies, though? You must have got so far through, and that's kind of what led you to that path, rather than kind of, I don't know, really. You didn't just go down the list and go, that'd be the one.
No, I was looking for research topics, and that came up, and it was part of a module, I think. I'm trying to remember myself now. Part of a module, I think, of the linguistics course, and so I wanted to look more into it then. And so I spent some time sitting in a classroom where there were a mainstream classroom with students who had dyslexia and some who didn't, and looking at how they reacted to the classroom environment with regard to things like note-taking, responding to questions. But it was only when I came here that I started to learn about the technology that was available, and I found that really interesting. So I've kind of gone down that route in the last 15 years.
Oh, I see. So yeah, what was kind of, as you started to kind of learn about linguistics and all the learning that way, what really kind of caught your interest and really kind of spurred you on to make more of a kind of career out of it? As you said, you come back here and your technology piqued your interest here, but you must have been already looking around that area when you did get back over to the UK.
Yeah, well, I knew I was going to be an English teacher after my PGC, and I ended up teaching for 2 years in South Africa. And I thought at that point, one, that I was going to have classrooms with first and second language speakers of English in the same classroom, but then also students with dyslexia as well. And so I thought, well, that is something that I should really know about and know what to look out for.
I see. And of course, you'd have had, in very short succession, a mirror of the South African education system and the English education system within a few years of one another. So, how did you find that coming back to the UK? You already alluded to that actually the awareness of dyslexia was higher, but just in a more general kind of thing, looking at the two systems as you would have been at that point in time.
Well, it was a little bit different because I was teaching in a state school in South Africa, teaching secondary English, and then when I moved here, through actually someone I was living with in a house share, I got a job at a university supporting students. So I kind of made that jump from secondary education to higher education, and then the first thing that really struck me was the amount of funding available through the Disabled Students Allowance scheme. So seeing students having support with technology and having support with one-to-one tuition, which was not something I'd come across before. And so straight away I could see what an impact that could make for students. Both the technology and the one-to-one support, which I'm really passionate about. And I think when those two work together, so for example, if you have a dyslexia tutor who understands the technology and helps the student to use it, then that can be a really powerful combination.
Yes, that is a point, is that the tech on its own is like, hey, have this device. Go crazy is not the same as have this device and here's how to best utilize it. Was there any particular piece of technology that you thought that really kind of sparked your interest in the early days that you're like, this is a cool thing to go pursuing?
Well, when I started supporting students back then, it was when students were often given dictaphones to record. Then, but then the kind of the mobile technology took off. So while I was here, the first iPhone was launched. And yeah, thinking back to that and what that looked like. And then you had apps like Sonos Audio Note Taker come along. And so that was really interesting because it was solving the problem of students having to go on their dictaphone and search through hours of recordings for that one 5-minute clip that they're trying to remember. And you could obviously load them onto the computer and search for them that way. But Audio Note Taker came along and you had the ability to kind of bookmark and color code and line up notes with audio. So for me, that was really revolutionary. And then from supporting students one-to-one, I then went on to assessing students for the DSA one-to-one. So yeah, that would be one of the tools I'd invariably show to a student with dyslexia to see whether they would benefit from that.
Yes. Yeah. So you obviously said you started with the dyslexia support. Now, we've already sort of said about having the sort of teacher/parent combination with the support, but what sort of things would you particularly focus on, and what did you find were the biggest wins in that area in terms of getting somebody to get the most out of the assistive tech? Because I bet I've had assistive tech devices before that I've gathered dust, to be honest. They've been in the bottom of my uni bag for as long as I can remember. They're probably still there now, wherever that bag has been thrown in the bottom of a wardrobe somewhere. And then other stuff I've gone and run with and use it all the time.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think one of the things with the software is throughout the kind of the DSA, there has been quite low take up of various bits of software from students. But I think some things that can really help with that. One of those being having really good assistive technology training to start with. So when the student or the person in the workplace gets that kit, that they then actually link up with a person, whether that's on Zoom or Teams, or whether that's sitting in the room with someone. People have different preferences on that. But going through the software, not just showing the features, so saying, oh, there's there's the play button that you use to play back text, but rather really embedding it into a job role or into a program of study where the student can really see how they would use that. So I think the AT training is really key, and there's a lot of AT training out there, but some really good practice that I've seen shows the student how they would use it day to day.
Yes. Any particular thing was most people's favourites if you were looking at the list of me like, they're going to like this one if you're about to do some training?
So again, I think it depends what the need is of the person that you're training. I've never actually done assistive technology training myself, but been involved with companies that do. And rather than just working through a list from top to bottom, a dragon at the top of the list, we're going to start with that. Really talking to the person and saying, well, what's the need? Is it note taking in meetings or lectures, and then starting with the software that solves that, really.
Yes, of course. And you said you moved on to being a DSA assessor now. What does that involve? How do you actually go about assessing somebody to work out what the support needs? I mean, I've been on the other end of that process where sat there and done the ed psych assessment, and then you're talking to an assessor and they got a sheet in front of them working their way through it, but there's got to be more thought into it than what it, I guess, going through it. It's definitely not just a tick box exercise, but what sort of thoughts are going in and what kind of stuff are you looking for and what kind of steers you one direction to the other in terms of what tech and other adjustments may be needed?
I think what's important is to approach each assessment individually, so not have any kind of preconceived notions about what a student might be struggling with. Obviously, you'll do some planning and think about things that may be appropriate to show them and the things that are appropriate to recommend, but really do that as a conversation. So I think making a student feel at ease is really important, and not that they're going through another kind of test for something, but rather having a chat to see what works for them, and then going with what they say. Sometimes we've gone through assessments and recommended things that you may not have thought of originally, and then I think it's really important to talk to the student about what their course involves. So for example, if you have a student on who's going on to a medical placement, or perhaps going out in the field somewhere, it may not be appropriate for them to be carting around a laptop with reading software for that bit of the course, whereas that works really well for them in their in their room where they're set up and they've got everything set up. So then you might look at something like a reading pen for that, and students have mixed reactions to that. Some really like that, some don't, but that's why it's an individual needs assessment to get to the bottom of what's going to work for them.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. And how have you enjoyed seeing tech evolve over the years?
Yeah, I've been an assessor on and off, and I keep coming back to it because I love talking to students, and I've done some workplace assessments as well, which have been really interesting. So I kind of work with other companies, but come back to the assessing in between that. But 12 to 13 years of that on and off. So I estimate I've seen over 1,000 students going through the DSA. I was trying to work it out at some point. Each one of those was different. I think that's the message to take away, really, from it. But coming back to your question, seeing technology evolve, that's been really interesting. One of the wow moments I think students have was kind of looking at mind mapping software and then seeing how they could then transform that into a document or a project. And we'll come back to that, I'm sure, as we go through. And
maybe we get to mind mapping.
but also seeing how the AI has started to come in, which again we'll come back to. But that's been really interesting. And actually, even in the last 12 months, I think there's been a shift towards a more positive view of AI. So we've seen that change from students to universities, where there's more acceptance of it and acknowledgement of the benefits it can bring, rather than it just doing the work for you, which is possible but isn't what it's designed for.
Not optimal.
Not optimal.
No. No, it's definitely not. Interestingly, you're also sort of, obviously you'd be doing all the support that way, and you'd be doing needs assessments, learning assessments, but you've also been managing assistive technology, and you've worked your way through to being a director of assistive technology. Now, how did your career grow that way? I can sort of see the link, but I can't see the pathway, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was doing needs assessments for a large DSA company, and ended up managing that service for a while. And then when I left there, I worked freelance for a while, and then I went to work for a company based in the Northeast, which is called Equality Solutions. And they have a number of strands, and one of those is providing assistive technology equipment to students, as well as the training and e-learning alongside that. So that was the kind of segue, if you like, into assistive technology provision on the commercial side.
Ah, okay. And then you sort of worked your way through, because you don't just jump in at that at director level, do you? So did you kind of work?
No, I worked my way up there. Yes.
And how did you find that side of the kind of coin versus what you had been doing as the sort of assessor side?
It was interesting, and I'd say kind of provision of equipment and doing that really well can be harder, because where there's IT involved, there are things that go wrong inevitably. Compatibility, computers, they always work perfectly, don't they? Never any problems. So there was all that side of it, making sure students were supported with that, which was really interesting, a real learning curve as well. And through that, I've kind of built lots of relationships with assistive technology software publishers who create this software. And what's really interesting about the DSA sector is it is a really tight-knit, small community of people, some of whom are involved in the workplace and others just in the DSA. But if you look at some of the products there, they've really evolved in the DSA and then moved out of that to support perhaps in the workplace or in schools, or even in the US or other markets, European markets. So I think the UK just has this reputation for being quite far ahead in assistive technology and leading the way there in a bit. And I think that's something we should really be proud of. And kind of watch how that evolves, because we do have really great companies creating that.
Yes, we do. We do have a lot, and spoken to a few of them, and it's really interesting. That is a very good point, that actually the DSA sector sometimes evolves. I guess maybe it's the proving ground and the growing ground for some assistive technology products, and then it gets to the point where then actually company A, would you want this for your staff? We could do that version, or the United States, or wherever it needs to go over the world. But that kind of proving ground of DSA is the place to start, and good proving ground as well.
Yes, absolutely. And quite often, not quite often, but sometimes companies started by students who have been through the DSA and had an original idea and created that. And I think that's really something to celebrate.
Yeah, I think so too. Yes, of course. Yes. And there can't be anybody who's going to, well, maybe there is. Maybe that's too strong a word, but a student with university in stress is going to be a pretty damn good product tester, aren't they? Whether it's a physical product and whether it survives the bottom of a bag that gets thrown in the corner when they go to do something else, or a bit of technology that they're using when they're doing an all-nighter and it fails at 4 o'clock in the morning, you're going to get that feedback pretty fast, aren't you?
Yeah.
So your current posting is, obviously, we've said Director of Assistive Technology, Iola. Yeah, they seem like quite well. Open Genius are the people behind it, and Iola is the product. They're quite a new company. So Should we start at the beginning and how did they get started and how did you then become involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So worth starting with the OpenGenius story. So OpenGenius has been creating mind mapping software for a long time, for the last 15 or so years. They had a product before called iMindMap, which was very popular. A lot of people I've spoken to know that product. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, they looked at moving from desktop software to browser-based software because that seemed to be the way that the world was going. Google Suite, that kind of thing. And so AOA came along as their web-based product, and AOA is fully web-based. It has accompanying mobile apps that you can use to support your work, but if you're running it on a computer, you're running it in the browser. And the really nice thing about that is you get the same experience whether you're running that on a Windows computer, a Mac, or even a Chromebook. Pretty much, but we'll come back to the product. And the company was started by Chris Griffiths, and is based in Cardiff, on the Bay in Cardiff. And Chris himself did some work with Tony Buzan, who came up with a lot of concepts around modern mind mapping himself. So if you want to look more at the work that he's done, you can have a look at chrisgriffiths.com. He's got a book called The Creativity Handbook, which talks about that. And he's about to have a book coming out called The Focus Fix, which looks at how we maintain focus on a particular task. So that's the story. And how did I get involved? That was the second part of your question. Interestingly, I did some work when I was at Equality Solutions. We did a little bit of work, so we actually resold AOA in the DSA as an equipment provider, and we did some work with them, getting some training into Equality Solutions e-learning platform, which is called Learning Labs. And so we'd done that work, and then I had gone back to freelance work, and about 6 months ago, they made contact and asked me to come back involved. So I work for them part-time and do a couple of other things alongside that.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's cool. So let's get some definition terms down, just in case people haven't heard of mind maps. Why mind maps? What are they, and what's the benefit?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And actually, before I started looking at the mind mapping software in detail, a question I might ask students in a DSA assessment is, do you like mind maps? And in your case, that would have been no. And in the case of a lot of students, that's no. And so then as an assessor, I might say, oh, well, I'm not going to recommend a piece of mind mapping software. But then what I've realized is that perhaps the students haven't had the full benefit of mind maps or understood them. So what was then important was to show how they could use them. So obviously they're really useful on paper, but then you digitize them, and then there's just so much more you can do with them. What we mean by a mind map is having a central idea with branches coming off it and sub branches coming off those, so that you've got a visual structure for a project plan, an essay, a business plan, whatever you want to have. A Christmas list if you want. And the benefit of that is you can then take these bubbles or branches and you can then link them together. So if you've got an idea on opposite sides of your map, you can then draw, whether that's on paper or on the computer, a line between them that links those ideas together. Whereas that's quite hard to do in a document that might go over several pages because it's in a linear format. And then from there, you can use color and images to differentiate your branches. So if you think of a very colorful mind map, with branches put at different places everywhere. I'm not talking about kind of lines of different branches, but branches going anywhere on your canvas, on your screen. Then it can be easier, and I say can because this isn't true for everyone, but it can be easier to remember what's on there. So, for example, if my branch going off to the top right of my screen is blue and it has introduction in it, and I'm then having to remember that for a presentation, I'm remembering blue, top right, the word introduction. Whereas if I just put that on a piece of paper and then write 20 other bullet points, for me, that's much harder to remember. And so you can then have the next branch is green and the next branch is yellow, etc. And you can use it as a revision tool, as a memorization tool in that way. So a lot of different benefits coming in there, and having this visual map is really helpful for people to understand concepts and how they link together. And on Iowa and other tools, you can add images to your branches as well. So you might have a light bulb for one of your branches, for example, and then that helps you to remember what's on it, or you understand the concept of that.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly with set dyslexics who tend to be visual thinkers. I got shown one where you pretty much use images for everything. So it's remembering, as you say, the light bulb is this, blah, 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 and almost have it in your head where the mind map goes, which I think would be quite powerful. So mind maps could look like anything. As you mentioned, they're a bit limited on a textbook, but the old improvement of the textbook is post-it notes over the walls with the strings between it, Sherlock Holmes style. Now that's obviously limited as well. So you've already sort of touched on what the software brings in terms of being able to drag and drop and put different colors to things and do sorts of things dynamically and live. But what's about Iola makes it stand out?
Great. So I think we're now kind of going into how mind mapping software has evolved from paper. So we're going into benefits that are largely realized through having a digital tool. And so an example of that is if you're planning a project, having really powerful task management is very important. So with AOA, for example, on every bubble, you can add as many tasks as you want to on each branch. You can set start dates and end dates. You can track your progress through the task. And then for each mind map in the software, it automatically, as soon as you create a task, it automatically creates a task board for that. So you haven't got to go through each branch and look at your tasks on it. You can then go to the task board view and see them on a Kanban style board. We call it a workflow board, where you can have categories, kind of vertical categories. And the example I use is you might label those as kind of things to do this week, things to do next week, things to do this month, but you can call them whatever you want, really. And then you can drag and drop your tasks between those as well. And then you can flip that view and you can see it if you've got start dates and end dates on your tasks. You can then see those in a Gantt timeline, and it will then visually show someone how they move from one task to the next. And as you track the progress, so you can move the progress bar for each task, and it kind of fills up the bar, if you like, up to 100%. And then someone knows they need to move on to the next task. And that might sound quite obvious, but I think for some students that I've assessed, knowing what to start with, knowing what to do next is really important. And so what also comes into that is collaboration. So you can have AO as an individual product through Access to Work, through the DSA, but companies can also buy a team license where users can share their projects and work on them together. So they can all see the same mind map. They can all add branches, comments, things on that. When you create a mind map in a team, you also get a chat function that comes up, so you can have live chat alongside that, and then you can assign tasks to people in your team, so you know who's working on what, and that can be very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're almost talking at this point almost as a project management tool, an alternative to a Gantt chart. And you've cited in some of the bars a Gantt chart rather than the linear kind of columns that Gantt chart does. You can have it pushed all over the place. And I can understand it in the corporate world, and well, any world. But I can. My initial strong image of that is using it as a project management tool in an alternative layout in a work environment. Um, but say I'm now a student and I've got an essay to write. That would look different than that environment. So, how would it work better then? But you might not need the progress management tools, but what you need is I don't know. I've got to write an essay on how Boeing Dreamliner works. What do I do with it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because a student can plan out this whole assignment. We've had students planning, dissertations on it, because you can make the map as big as you want, and then they can then share that with perhaps a one-to-one tutor, so perhaps a dyslexia tutor or a study skills tutor, and collaborated on it that way. But what they can also do is use the notes function on each branch to actually start writing out their paragraphs. So coming back to the essay, they can use this notes function. It's got rich text formatting, so you can bold, underline, put a table in, all sorts of things. And then there's a tab at the top where you can change your mind map into a document, and it will create a document view. Now, what I'm talking about here is not exporting it to Microsoft Word. I'm talking about doing it within the software. And so then you would see all your notes as paragraphs in your assignment. And within the document view, you can then drag your headings, and your headings and subheadings are the branches themselves. You can drag those around and rearrange them, and then they'll rearrange in order on the map. Similarly, you can rearrange their order on the map. It will change them in the document. Because the problem I think that students have is they might write a lot, but their structure may not be quite right. And they might think, right, I need to move this here. But if you're working on a really huge document, that can be quite overwhelming. It can be hard to find what you want if you haven't put subheadings and headings in as you've gone. Just end up with a load of text that's then really difficult to work with. And so what we're doing then with the mind map is we're breaking it down into an outline that students can view as a map, but they can also view it as a linear document and work on it that way. And then when they want to hand it in, they've got the option to export it still.
And you mentioned it's fully web-based on a computer as well as some mobile apps. I guess it all synchronizes across platforms. So if you suddenly think of something part way on the bus on the way to work, you're like, oh, and just add it on the mind map via your phone. How well does it work if it's offline? If you're somewhere with no Wi-Fi, or you've hunkered up in your favorite coffee shop and realize their Wi-Fi is down for the day?
It'll work if you have a map on screen, but you do need to reconnect if you want to save that. So it is an online tool. What we see is students having access to Wi-Fi widely now, or perhaps through a hotspot, and people in the workplace pretty much always having internet to hand. Amazing when it goes off for 10 minutes, it feels like the world's ending sometimes, doesn't it? So it is an online tool. But coming back to the mobile app, you're absolutely right. The idea of the mobile app, which is on iPhone and iPad, and then Android as well, is you use it to add things. So the way I use it is I think of a task that I need to do that I haven't remembered, and I'm on the go somewhere. I put it in as a task there. And then within each mind map, there's an idea bank, which is a light bulb symbol up in the top left. And the idea of that is you literally can put any ideas in there. You haven't got to add it as a branch if you're not sure where it's going to fit in your project. So I think that really supports some students with ADHD, for example, or students with dyslexia with short-term memory difficulties, where they've got this idea, they're trying to hold on to it, and they just need to put it somewhere before it goes. And when I've shown students that, they've been positive about that, and then they can put that into the idea bank, and then on the software they can drag that across to the map and just put it on whatever branch or sub branch they want to. So I think that's one example of how AOA really supports neurodiversity in how it works, and the visual layout, kind of clear layout, visual colors, I think is also very supportive of that.
Yes, definitely. Now, we've mentioned AI and how that might enhance Aeola's capabilities. So, what is Aeola doing with AI that putting in, I don't know, tell me about the Boeing Dreamliner in ChatGPT doesn't already do?
Well, I think kind of coming back to students, putting a question like that into ChatGPT would give them some probably beautifully formatted paragraphs of text that then makes it really difficult to turn into your own words. So it's then easy to plagiarize, whether that's knowingly or unknowingly, using the AI to kind of create essays. So I think using it in software like AOA is a safer space for students. So I'll give you that example. You can, if you're sitting there with a blank canvas and your central idea is the Boeing Dreamliner, but you don't know where to start with that, you can then say to AOA, generate some ideas for me around that. And it will go away to the AI and it will come up with ideas, but it'll put them as branches and sub branches. So as short notes. So a student can't then take that and just hand it in. They've then got to come up with their own ideas around that. And so that is where I think there's a lot of fear about it kind of doing the creative thinking part for students, but they still have to think about what they want to say, and link those ideas together to make a cohesive essay. So that's quite nice. And then within a map itself, if you have a word in there that you don't understand, so perhaps a tutor's given you a word and said, you need to talk about, I don't know anything about Boeing Dreamliners, but a technical term that they need to discuss. They can wind deflection.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I knew you'd have one. But they can then just kind of go to the AI and say, just explain this. And rather than just giving them a definition of wind deflection, the AI will look back to the central idea, which is the Dreamliner, and talk about wind deflection in the context of that aeroplane.
Right, I see. Yes, okay. That's kind of interesting. It's almost like a sift and sort of the AI. Like it will intelligently use the AI to assist the user in the mind map, depending on where they are in the process, and it gets you the bullet points to get you started. Which is, AI is here to stay, and it's nice to hear tools that are making a smarter use of it, I guess, is probably the best way of looking at it, I would have thought. And it's nice that all of these capabilities come in. How are you finding that in a corporate setting? Because corporate settings of AI are not necessarily, they're kind of working their way through it slowly at the minute, trying to work out how that is or isn't a threat to their business IP and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we've shown it a few times, and I think if you see AOA as an assistive technology tool, which is helping someone to perform to their best in the workplace, then it is helping to level the playing field in that way. But obviously there are a lot of different opinions in the workplace about the use of AI. But one company's been trialing it, and they've said that it's really helpful to give them a starting point for a project, and it pulls in a lot of information that they might already know, but they haven't got it all in one place, if that makes sense. So say they're looking at something, and they want to go off and explore different tangents of that. They'll get all that in one place through the AI on the mind map, and then they can think about which bit they want to explore further and kind of then, assign it to different people using the task management if they wanted to.
Okay, yeah. I had wondered what sort of pushback you get from it. What is your kind of? We sort of spoke. I think we've covered most of the functionality and the pros and the benefits of AOLA as a solution for mind mapping. How are you seeing it versus other software out there that does mind mapping? Where does it kind of fit in the wider sort of mind mapping software landscape?
Sure. Well, it's interesting because everyone's evolving, which is really nice, and there's some really great solutions out there. Obviously, the browser-based nature. There are other softwares that are browser-based, but there are some that are desktop-based. So looking at the pros and cons of that. And I think just the feedback that we've had is the visuals are very nice. It's very kind of pleasing graphics. That's what one student has said to us. And I think we're kind of getting into a situation where something has to be visually pleasing for a student to use it, or not for them to use it, but it helps them to use it. So if you think about the Apple ecosystem, they design things to look very nice along the way, and I think that's one of our aims there as well, to do that, to make it an app that you really want to use.
Yeah, and I think there is a thing, isn't there, with the user interface where actually I tend to find that having something that flows through nicely and is visually pleasing because it's less kind of straining out and less old school computer, because particularly like what sort of software I use at work, CAD software, I remember all the symbols of what everything does. A few of my colleagues are really good on using shortcuts, but I can never remember shortcut buttons. But I know the symbols and know what it's underneath. So having something visually stronger suits me better because I'm like, oh yes, this is this. We're having like more text-based UI or just kind of really kind of clunky, simple kind of visuals doesn't work for me because that's what I remember. That's what's in my head is all the visuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've tried to move away from having a lot of drop-down menus, so there are no, there's no top bar with drop-down menus. It doesn't use that format. It uses more kind of graphic spaced menus around the page that are always in the same place, and that's also trying to support that way of learning. But then equally, there are people who want the drop-down menus, and that's absolutely fine.
Yes, definitely, most definitely, yeah. Cool. Is there a particular feature that you think is really cool that we haven't mentioned yet? You're like, oh yes, this really gets me excited whenever I get a chance to show somebody.
Actually, there is, and I can't remember if I used it in the talk that I did on the Dyslexia show stage. I feel like I might have, and that's the presentation tool. So what that does is it allows you to take a mind map and present it branch by branch. So you can configure all that. So if you don't want all the branches on your mind map, you can just choose the ones to create. But what I tend to do now is if I want a presentation, I map that, and then I use the auto create button in AOA to create a presentation. And what that will do is as you click through, it will just zoom around your map graphically and kind of move from branch to branch, and then show you any images, show you any sub branches on there as well. And I've done that a couple of times, and people like the way that looks so much that it kind of makes up for what I'm saying, which might be quite boring.
I always got told by an early boss of mine that, you don't want to pour too much in presentations, make it look visually nice and leave it alone. Stop dropping the animations in.
Yes, but equally you could spend so long working on a project and then having to create a presentation on that, and that almost seems a duplication of effort there, I think. Whereas if you're confident on your map, then just being able to present it can kind of reduce stress, I think, and certainly save time for someone.
Okay, so before we wind up the podcast, I ask each guest that comes on 3 rapid fire questions. They don't need rapid fire answers from yourself, but they are quick questions from me. So shall we dive into question number 1?
I'm a bit scared, but go for it, Matt.
Okay. Question number one then. What prejudice have you had about dyslexia that has been proven wrong?
I think that someone with dyslexia will always struggle to read text that's in a certain format. Because 20 years ago, coming back to the start of our conversation, that was
which wasn't 20 years
which
ago.
wasn't 20 years ago. That was probably the understanding that I started with. It was difficult to read because the letters swam around, but I think that's a misconception because we now know that that is not true for all dyslexic people.
Definitely not. No. Erling syndrome is a slightly different thing. Okay, rapid fire question number 2. If an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
I would describe that as a different way of thinking and processing language.
Excellent. Yes, very good explanation there. And the final question is rapid fire set, but before I ask it, you're not allowed to use any tool by OpenGenius to answer this. But seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack show, what is your favorite dyslexia life hack?
I'm going to answer in the technology vein because, as we've probably gathered through this podcast, I do find that fascinating. And I think that some of the tools you have on your phone are incredibly powerful. So, for example, the shared calendar I have with my wife makes a huge difference to how we operate and remember to do things. And the fact that either of us can put something in and it will be there. I can't remember how we functioned before that.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a tool I use a lot with share calendars. Makes up for my inability to remember events.
So usually I've forgotten to tell my wife something and then it's gone in the shared calendar. But I do try and tell her as well.
Yeah, it's good to communicate in person. Yeah. Excellent. Well, that just leaves me to ask if there's anything to add and where can people find you?
Great. Well, this has been really fun to do this, Matt. And if you would like to find out more about AOA, do head over to aoa.com. We'll put the link in the podcast, I'm sure, but it's ayoa.com. And there's lots of information there. There's a completely free version of AO, which just gives you the mind mapping, not any of the other features that we've talked about. And that allows you to create unlimited maps, and it's free. It's not a trial, so you don't start getting charged. And it just gives you the mind mapping bit. So if you want to try and mind map, head over and set up a free AO account. If you'd like us to come and talk to you about the benefits of AO for an organization, drop us an email through the website, the contact form on the website, and we'll come back to you.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'll put that down in the show notes, which as always are available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. That just leaves me to say thank you very much, Chris, for taking the time to come on the show this evening.
It's been a pleasure, Matt, and you've asked some really challenging questions, so thank you for that. I've got my thinking cap on a very warm June evening.
Yes, it's very warm. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I'll speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.